I woke up with a feeling of wonder, as if a field of flowers was blossoming nearby. A child was saved from death. 1,000 heretics were burning alive, begging and sobbing and howling.
Rogue Trader is a magical game. Although I will spend a good portion of this video critiquing it, the scope of what it achieves is so impressive that I want to make that clear above all else. There's so much this game excels at that any qualifiers I can staple onto that praise feel like I'm being petty. And I am to a degree. However, I wanted to make this video for a simple reason. I love this game. I think it's one of the best works of Warhammer 40k fiction, which is one of my favorite settings ever created. I've been a fan of Owlcat's projects for a few years now, and the CRPG genre is one of my most beloved. I was pretty much destined to like this game. Hi, I'm Gunmetal. I make long-form, high-effort shitposts. If you're looking for a more standard, should-I-buy this game kind of review, I'll say that it depends on your patience and tolerance for bugs. If both are high, it's an easy recommendation, especially if you like 40k. If you're not familiar with 40k, or have always been interested but lost on where to start, Rogue Trader is an excellent entry point. It explains everything about the setting with astounding competence and at a digestible pace. If you don't have much patience for bugs and jank, however, I would recommend waiting for more patches and the first few DLCs. Bugs don't bother me much, and I know that Rogue Trader won't stay in the state forever, but I also know I'm an outlier when it comes to this kind of stuff, so your mileage may vary. In any case, this video is not a review. It is instead a very subjective critique of a game and IP I enjoy tremendously. If that sort of long-form content doesn't interest you, I don't want to waste your time any further. Thanks for stopping by. For the three of you still watching, let's get into it. In order to explain what the fuck I'm talking about and why I care so much about this game, we have to talk about Warhammer 40k. Warhammer 40k is a gonzo military science fantasy setting with grim gothic aesthetics that began in the 80s as a satire of Thatcherite Britain. Virtually everything about it has changed since then, so talking about it in broad strokes beyond that is difficult. Moreover, there's so much goddamn lore that unraveling it all into something coherent isn't just challenging, it's impossible. To newcomers, it's so dense that it appears impenetrable. It's not. However, I've found that what first draws you into 40k often defines what you like the most about the setting and how you perceive it. As the decades roll on, distinct 40k voices have emerged, and everyone has their own 40k as a result. They have their favorite faction, their own way of looking at the setting, and their favorite way to experience it, whether it's the tabletop, the books, or the games. What made Rogue Trader so interesting and special is that I have never seen an interpretation of 40k that so closely matches my 40k. I've loved this setting for over 2 decades now. I avoid using the word fan because it implies an uncritical consumerist mindset, so I'll instead say that many 40k books, the Gaunt's Ghost books in particular, are some of my favorite novels ever written. They aren't like high art, of course, but they captured my imagination when I was a kid and instilled within me a lifelong passion for both the setting and military science fiction in general. It's impossible for me to be objective about something so formative. Therefore, I'll try to convey my particular perception of the setting so the rest of the video will make some sort of sense. Warhammer 40k has a reputation for being overly grimdark, a setting devoid of hope or humanity, and with good reason. The Imperium of Mankind, the human faction, is a fascist, theocratic, bureaucratic dystopia where life for the average person is both shockingly bleak and incredibly brief. However, this common perception of 40k belies the wryer, more absurdist thrusts of its earlier incarnations and the flippant tone intended to undercut its grimness. The grimdark meme also overlooks that 40k's most popular characters, and my personal favorites, are true heroes, men and women who manage to find scraps of hope and humanity in a universe so dark and myopic that it's intended as parody. Now, I know I'm approaching dangerous territory here, but if you were to go so far as to extract something artistic and meaningful out of a tabletop war game designed to sell overpriced plastic to nerdy British preteens, it's that the spark of the truly human, what is good and noble in us, will never die, not even in the bleakest conditions imaginable. What makes these small moments work, however, is that they are rare and fleeting. Kayfabe is maintained. That's why my favorite faction is the Imperial Guard, the average Joe Schmoes of the Imperium who have to fight against murder gods, cosmic eldritch hate nightmares, and space elves that'll either blast you apart with brain magic or twist your limbs and organs into a combination room piece and musical instrument, without killing you. For funsies. This love for the Imperial Guard, my 40k, neither are rare perspectives. The Gaunt's Ghost and Cyphus Cain novels are two excellent ground-level perspectives about how much it fucking sucks to exist in the 40k universe, but they are also standout examples of how much it can mean to be a normal person and find heroism in desperate circumstances. More uncommonly, I also like Inquisitors and Rogue Traders because I find it fascinating to see the opposite end of the power spectrum, examine the kind of people that wield the immense amount of cruel and authoritarian power afforded to them by the Imperium. Imperium. The potential for interesting character work here is limitless. Again, I was destined to like this game. These glimpses of humanity amidst the unrelenting bleakness, combined with the right amount of absurdity and heavy metal sci-fi action, makes for unparalleled potential, peak fiction, although I often find it falling short. To make a tiresome food analogy, 40k fiction is like stew. It's usually pretty good. You throw a bunch of tasty shit in a pot and it's probably going to come out fine. However, when you get just the right mixture of ingredients and spices, the result can be magical. For me, this was the 2000-2006 era of Black Library books, the 3rd and 4th editions of the tabletop. It's not so silly that it comes across as broad, toothless satire, it isn't so serious that you can't find the absurdity, and there's slivers of genuine heart and imagination that give it all some actual meaning. What makes Rogue Trader so excellent is that it shares this exact view of the fiction. Rogue Trader's 40k is my 40k, and I was shocked at how much it adhered to that clear vision given the franchise's current identity crisis. As the IP continues its meteoric ascent into mainstream popularity, its rougher, more parodistic elements are falling out of favor with Games Workshop, as well as its darkest, grimiest elements that would otherwise make it unappealing to a general audience. After all, no one who buys Baby Yoda bumper stickers is gonna buy Pain Engine merch. No one wants a Funko Pop of Fabius fucking Bile. We'll talk more about this at the end, but I was shocked at how closely Owlcat's vision of the franchise matched my own. How much more closely aligned it is with a different, more engaging era of 40k. They even like the same stuff I do. It's got Space Wolves, both flavors of Eldar, the Mechanicus having an inane, incomprehensible schism over a paradoxical point of doctrine. I lost count of how many times I caught myself grinning, laughing, Leo pointing at the screen. It's rare in any RPG to read some dialogue, formulate a response or reaction in your head, then find that exact response as an available dialogue option you can actually select. I've found it's even rarer to be so in sync with 40k fiction, but with Rogue Trader, this was almost every conversation. And it wasn't just the dialogue. The art direction, the music, the combat, it all feels like they made this game for me specifically. Before we get to that nearly part, I want to spend some more time gushing. Not only because good things deserve praise, but it'll help you understand why I felt compelled to make the criticisms I do. From here on out, this video contains full spoilers for the entire game. I tried to avoid getting into too much detail, but if you want to go into this game as blind as possible, consider this video a solid recommendation to do so. Okay, last chance? Are all good? Alright, let's continue. For the first 2/3 of the game, the first 70 hours of a 110-hour campaign, Rogue Trader was rocketing up to the top of my best games of all time list. As a pretentious RPG nerd, this is no easy feat. Everything lands, and the first 2.5 acts are outstanding. 11 out of 10, no comments, no notes. Although Rogue Trader didn't have the budget of Baldur's Gate 3, the level of presentation on display was outstanding. Right from the first screen, it's what grabs your attention. Owlcat nailed the 40k style from top to bottom. The scale is enormous, the assets are richly detailed, the prose is lush and engaging, the voice acting is incredible, and the music fits the game perfectly. It might not have the same unique voice and flavor that the Mechanicus OST does, but it makes up for that with variety and bombast. You listen to a song from the Rogue Trader OST, you know, oh yeah, that's Rogue Trader. Although CRPGs are more often lauded for their writing and role-playing features, the level of thought and care that was put into the presentation alone goes a long way. Rogue Trader is immersive and thrilling in ways that CRPGs don't often manage. When everything comes together, there's nothing like it.
The curse of the Wolfen is the most fearsome and most terrible foe on Fenris. In the heart of every brother, there lives a dark beast, bloody and forever ravenous.
I'll do it. Life is a threat. I am his will made manifest. Now you can escape the Emperor's judgment.
We should talk about combat. Although I also love Owlcat's Pathfinder games, I was always frustrated by their character building in combat. I'm too much of a dumbass to fully appreciate the former, while the latter was overdone due to subpar encounter design and a reliance on buff maxing. Rogue Trader does a lot to smooth out these issues. Smarter people who are more into build crafting have already broken this game over their knee, but as a dumbass, I found myself at the right level of challenge. I actually started this game on normal because of my previous experience with Kingmaker and Wrath of the Righteous, but I bumped the difficulty up to daring before the prologue was over. over. It's much harder to screw yourself over during character creation, and as long as your party leans into their specializations, you'll experience a satisfying power curve. The game starts off brutal and challenging, so gaining levels and finding good loot always feels rewarding and important. Speaking of which, itemization in this game is outstanding. I'm more of a narrative nerd, so it's not something I usually notice, much less feel the need to comment on, but the war gear you find throughout Rogue Trader is well-paced, well-designed, and fun to use. Plundering dungeons and tackling difficult combat encounters always feels worthwhile, because at the end of it you'll know you'll find some sick plasma gun or a ring that shoots nuclear meltdowns. Loot is so powerful and dynamic that it'll constantly change your battle strategies or character advancement plans. In a similar vein, I was very impressed by Rogue Trader's encounter design. The Pathfinder games often suffer from throwing trash fights at you, assuming you're using real time with pause and can finish them in a minute or two. This had the side effect of making each fight feel samey, no matter who you were fighting or where. As a consequence of switching to a slower, turn-based system in Rogue Trader, the battles are placed more judiciously and with stronger intent. The game is very willing to throw brutal encounters at you, because it expects you to take each one seriously and plan your moves with care. While your party members can't die in combat, they can stack up debilitating traumas if they hit 0 wounds. This means that dungeon crawls can turn into harrowing battles for survival at the drop of a hat, your party collecting debuff after debuff as you claw your way back to your ship. The whole wound and trauma system is also something I enjoy. Another reason I didn't like the Pathfinder games' combat is because hit points necessitated micromanagement, and 2 or 3 bad dice rolls can turn what was intended as a breezy fight into an unnecessary resource sink. In Rogue Trader, as long as you're above 0 wounds at the end of a battle, you're back up to full no problem. This is more forgiving, but I found it to be more fitting for the setting, as well as giving you a stronger sense of control and investment in combat. And although the game became comically easy at the end, I felt like I was being fairly challenged throughout. That's another aspect of the encounter design that works so well. Rogue Trader has a staggering array of enemy types and arenas. From cover to range to enemy density, elevation, and impassable terrain, each variable can have a dramatic effect on how a fight plays out, its tempo, and its mood. There is some repetition with random encounters and reused concepts, but the handmade stuff is incredible. Sometimes it's a brutal battle to clear a fatal funnel. Sometimes you can approach an arena from different entryways, changing your starting position and tactical avenues. Sometimes you're fighting a wall of zombies, sometimes you're fighting a demon in a broom closet, sometimes you're racing to blow up generators before a timer hits 0. Bosses often have unique gimmicks that add extra layers to a fight, or a second health bar that kicks in right as you think you found your footing. Combined with that aforementioned presentation, Rogue Trader's turn-based combat often feels more tense, energetic, and visceral than some games that have real-time action as their focus. This is also helped by the game's outstanding characters. Besides being well written and engaging, they serve as insightful windows into their respective factions, immersing you in the world of 40k without being overbearing.
As I've said time and time again, characters are the keystones of any narrative, no matter the setting or medium. CRPGs in particular have a long and storied history of engaging characters. Rogue Trader is no different. Abelard, your ride-or-die second-in-command, is already a fan favorite, very Kim Katsuragi-coded. Besides being a very capable frontliner, he's a gruff old soul with an understated heroic streak. Although he doesn't have much of an arc, his dutiful nature and baffled reactions to your antics are endlessly entertaining. Sister Argenta is fantastic as well. As a sister of battle, she has as much love for heretics as Batman does for seagulls. What I like about her is that just because she is, by definition, a zealot for the Imperial cult, she isn't quite as simple and unthinking as that would imply. In the worst 40k writing, Emperor-bothering fanatics are painted with a broad brush and tend to be indistinguishable between themselves. Sister Argenta, however, has a very human story about her faith and how it shaped her life. Hirulette in Eldar Outcast has an excellent arc where she struggles with her grief, her obsession with finding her lost kin, her relationship to humanity, and how to best follow her conscience. Initially, she comes across as your typical smug space elf, but superb voice acting and uncovering her backstory paint a far more complex and engaging picture. Ulfar is a standout as well. I'm not a huge fan of Space Marines, if only because I find them overrepresented in the fiction, despite them working much better in small doses. Furthermore, their central conceit as fearless, genetically altered, indoctrinated killing machines means that they're difficult to portray with any sort of complexity or personality. I'm a sucker for Space Wolves, however, because although their identity has been flanderized over the years, the very first 40k books I ever read were the Ragnar Blackmane Space Wolf novels. They've aged since their release in 1999, but they paint a far more engaging picture of what Astartes can be. Ulfar continues that tradition. When it comes to 40k, a Space Marine's characterization is typically synonymous with their chapter shtick, but Ulfar has an honest-to-God arc about overcoming an insecurity complex. A Space Marine with an insecurity complex.
It sounds silly, but it's subtly done, and shows how much Astartes value their brotherhood. I love the voice acting for him too. At first I thought a filter was a bit of a corny choice, but it grew on me as the game progressed. It gives everything he says a booming, sonorous quality that emphasizes both his character and his inhumanity. Pascal, of course, is rad as hell too. His inscrutable nature as a high-ranking member of the Mechanicus made his game-long companion quest confounding to follow, but once everything is revealed, it all clicks into place, and he serves as a fantastic examination of just how alien the Mechanicus can be. We'll talk about the rest later for different reasons, but the point is made. Every companion in Rogue Trader is wonderfully characterized. Even if they're not optimal in combat or their questline is a complete nothing burger, they have interesting insights into the broader 40k setting and have strong personalities that make them charming and memorable. Owlcat realized that characters are an integral part of world building and did their best to ensure that each companion served to elevate the player's understanding of the factions they belong to. With a closer, more personal insight, players are given more reasons to care about what's happening, more reasons to continue digging, and are better informed to make decisions as the plot progresses. 40k is such a vast, intricate setting, Rogue Trader would have collapsed if it had failed to engage the player this way. Another way they convey the scale of the setting is through the colony management system. Although they've had variants of settlement building since Kingmaker, this is the first time I enjoyed it. It's not a completely fleshed out subsystem or anything, but it adds so much to the game's world building and atmosphere. Whenever you're making a decision about a colony, you're clicking through multiple other games worth of stories. I can imagine several tabletop campaigns being structured around each decision point, and you're making such decisions constantly. This illustrates both the absurd scale of 40k as well as the level of power afforded to the Imperium's elite. Each colony also gives franchise newcomers an excellent cross-section of common Imperial worlds. Agri worlds, mining planets, forge worlds, shrine worlds, and prison planets. Each one has a story that explores what these places look like and how the billions of people on them might live. The boons, buffs, and reputation bonuses you can get from each building are a blunt but effective way of illustrating how Imperial powers that be manage competing interests. There are some flaws here. Nothing that upgrades your ship is worthwhile because the space battle system itself launched in such an undercooked state, and while the trading empire stuff has potential, it's undercut by only having 2 factions with any real development. Overall, I still feel like the kingdom management stuff was more necessary for Rogue Trader than previous Owlcat titles. Even if it doesn't always add to the minute-to-minute gameplay, it helps convey the scale Rogue Traders operate at. You wave your hand at the peasant folk and millions die in the process of realizing your whims. Unfortunately, it's here where the gushing ends. Mostly. Rogue Trader does so much right for so long that its flaws don't become evident until much later in the game, and when they do, they undermine the strengths of what came before due to how central they are to the experience. Rogue Trader's biggest flaws are its story plotting and its alignment system, and they fail in the same ways. In the final third of the game, when the time comes to pay off all that they set up, they collapse in on themselves instead. Once Chapter 4 rolled around, I constantly found myself saying, wait, that was it? Plot beats resolve so fast you might click past them on accident, and the alignment system doesn't have any meaningful consequences, so pursuing it feels pointless. These are not crippling flaws, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't have spent so much time praising the game, but they are what make Rogue Trader nearly 40k perfection. Missed potential is always more frustrating than something being outright terrible. It's extremely clear how some more time in the oven would have made Rogue Trader one of the best games ever made. I'm going to talk about each issue in closer detail to illustrate what I mean. I also want to show just how subjective my critique is, how being such a huge 40k nerd led me to the conclusions I reached. I'm in a weird place with this game because being the type of 40k fan that I am, I was way more on board with this game than I would have been otherwise. But that also meant I was more sensitive to its flaws, and that I care about them more than I probably should. Regardless of your own familiarity with 40k, however, I think its writing issues are pretty apparent. What frustrates me is that most of the narrative is so well done. In fact, I think this game has a great story, but it makes a number of unforced errors that weaken everything I liked about it. The main quest is about uncovering an Inquisitor's plot to shackle a fragment of a star god, all while navigating the countless number of fuck-ups that he and your predecessor made in the process. Now, none of the story beats are particularly shocking if you're even remotely paying attention.
Palpatine's behind it all.
But that's just the plot beats, not what the narrative is actually about. 40k began with the premise that to exist within the Imperium is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable, and Rogue Trader's story is a framework that explores what that means. This is what I was talking about earlier when I was blathering about my 40k, why I was so delighted by Owlcat's portrayal of the setting. It's critical of the Imperium in ways that I find thoughtful and incisive. Rogue Trader shows that the Imperium suffers not just from external threats, but that its fascist theocratic dogmatism creates more problems for itself constantly. The elites, enjoying the unilateral power afforded to them by 10,000 years of stagnation, are always vying amongst themselves to expand their wealth and influence, often through dangerous means when traditional methods exhaust themselves. In doing so, they cause tremendous suffering amongst the lower classes, who seek out any escape they can find. Hence the unending tide of chaos cults and other heresies found throughout the Imperium. Some pursue them out of greed, some out of dark, misguided pragmatism, and others out of desperation. This is all represented beautifully in Rogue Trader. The criticisms I have instead come from how the story is executed. It starts very strong. Theodora is killed, you're the Rogue Trader now, and all your shit's on fire. This is a great hook. The first two acts are about stitching your realm back together and asserting yourself as a new power in a remote, lawless region plagued with problems. When you're finally set free, it's engaging as hell. As you're working to reassert the Von Valencius dynasty, you're exploring the Coronis Expanse, finding secrets, side stories, and gathering breadcrumbs about the main plot. Once you've settled the crises on your main planets, you spend a few weeks off-camera to finish stabilizing your trade empire. And then you're immediately kidnapped and taken to Kamarad, the worst place in the entire setting. Although this section has been much maligned, I think it's only part of the problem. The real issue, I think, stems from the narrative surrounding it. Chapter 3 can be reduced down to suffering in Kamarad for a few months before escaping. The main plot reason for this is to give the Coronis Expanse enough time to set itself on fire again, but the question remains, why? By structuring itself like this, the story is spinning its tires. As soon as you've escaped and Chapter 4 begins, you're right where Chapter 2 ended, just with some names and events shuffled around. The way this is relayed to you is also exceptionally weak. When the story started, you felt what the narrative was going for. Everything sucks. Some asshole stole a son, and you had to put considerable time, effort, and resources into unfucking it all. The stakes felt real and immediate. Chapter 4 is all tell, no show. You're told the Coronis Expanse is in open rebellion and everything's on fire again, but the story has lost all its impetus, so it feels flat and arbitrary. It makes sense that things would go to hell in your sudden absence, but Chapter 3 should have started on a more precarious note. Instead of giving the Rogue Trader weeks to stabilize their realm in a cutscene, I think the story would have been much better served if the betrayal happened earlier in Chapter 2, just before you were able to resolve the crisis fully. This would help keep the threats encountered in Chapter 2 cooking in the back of the player's minds without the need to info dump them once they're back on their ship. Kamarad is intended to knock the player down a few pegs in terms of the narrative, but it overstays its welcome, and since you get all your ship back in a couple hours, this beat rings hollow and ruins the pacing. You've already done the vast majority of exploration and learning back in Chapter 2, so once you're out of Kamarad and starting Chapter 4, the game's got nothing left in the tank. It's woefully short. You do a handful of companion quests, a couple brief main quests, then it's on to the climax. If Chapter 4 had been longer and put more work into showing the player how the Expanse blew up again, the rest of the story would have been immensely elevated. Chapter 3 would have felt like a necessary interlude between two larger acts. There'd be more room to include the stuff it introduces and pay it off in more satisfying ways, making it feel less ancillary to the overall narrative. If you don't recruit Marajai, the single remnant of Kamarad in Act 4 is blapping the Arch Machinator in a single dungeon that's barely more than a few hallways. There'd be more room to properly conclude other arcs from the earlier chapters as well. For example, the Cult of the Final Dawn is hyped up throughout the game as a sinister, omnipresent threat. It's the cult that Kunrad belongs to. The greater demon they worship has been taunting and tempting you for the entire game. They're even being led by the fucking Word-Bearers, one of the most ancient and imposing Chaos Space Marine legions. Chapter 1 ends with your party shitting their pants over just one of these guys. Chapter 4 ends with Abelard punching the Edge of Daybreak in the face and calling him a bitch. The Final Dawn's entire plotline ends with a text adventure and then a linear dungeon full of bullshit, time-wasting warp traps. I spent the vast majority of Chapter 4 feeling not like I was rescuing a sector falling apart at the seams, but instead kicking sand on a couple grease fires that popped up while I was otherwise indisposed in Sweat Goblin Torture Land. All the hard work the first chapters put in to give the story a strong sense of direction and establish game-long arcs is squandered. The stories make sense and work in summation, but experiencing them is a failure of denouement. The story only really came together for me in the second-to-last conversation. Once Calcazar explained his plot and everything Theodora did during her reign as Rogue Trader, I was back on board, but this was literally the last 15 minutes of a sprawling 110-hour campaign. Before that final moment with Calcazar, there was nothing in the narrative that justified my character rushing off to stop him. All I know for sure at the end of Chapter 4 was that he was up to some shady shit, which is so broad and obvious that it's completely empty as a plot point. I understand the writers didn't want to reveal too much too early, but by withholding so many breadcrumbs about the Inquisitor, I was left in the lurch. All the characters come up to you to say goodbye and pat you on the back, back, which feels sudden and strange because, again, I have no idea what the Inquisitor is plotting or why it's so urgent I go stop him right this instant. If Rogue Trader had maintained its excellent pacing from its first few chapters and made Chapter 4 more robust, this moment would have felt far more earned and dramatic. If there's any word that sums up the issues with Rogue Trader's writing, it's anticlimax. Whether it's a side character having a temper tantrum and attacking everyone for no reason, or a central plot thread fizzling out after hours of build-up, the game is full of excellent, intriguing stories that fail to resolve in satisfying ways. All the good stuff is already there, the core of the narrative is solid, but Rogue Trader feels like it was hamstrung on the finishing line. The companion quests suffer in the same way. I like how Rogue Trader structures them. They last for most of the game, they have strong hooks, and they carefully track how the player interacts with the relevant character. Everything you say to them can matter, and it doesn't signpost the correct options. But again, despite all these positives, there's flaws in the execution. Some just end abruptly, like Argenta's. Her story has great moments and interesting conversations about her faith, but it all ends with a 30-second fight against some trash mobs before she finishes her character arc off-screen. Furthermore, the ends of several character arcs are locked behind romance. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm glad to see Owlcat continue their streak of solid romances. I mean, hell, it's about time a 40k story was allowed to be horny. And it is very horny. The franchise has always been skittish and perfunctory when it comes to matters of sex, and as a result, this insightful angle of characterization has been chronically lacking. As for Rogue Trader, I understand that in a setting defined by paranoia and dogma, people are not going to share their deepest secrets with anyone, just their closest companions. If that. However, if a companion has an incompatible sexuality or gets jealous of your asexual elf GF, you often lose out on the conclusion of their arcs, leaving their characters feeling unfinished and half-baked. More threads left dangling. Romancing a character should add depth and new dimensions to them, but their arcs also shouldn't end because you didn't pursue that route. It's a tough balancing act, and one that Rogue Trader doesn't always nail. If you don't romance Heinrichs, he's just Inquisition Man. If you don't romance Jai, she's just Smuggler Lady. I like both of these characters, but their platonic incarnations feel incredibly flat compared to the companions that have more complete arcs out of the box. Now, sure, it might encourage replayability to romance a different character in each playthrough, but spending upwards of 80 hours or more on another run just so you can get actual resolution for a single character arc feels a little bit like total bullshit. Speaking of multiple playthroughs and abrupt endings, it's time to awkwardly close out this section and talk about Rogue Trader's most damning flaw, its alignment system. The reason I talk so much about 40k and what I love about it was not only to express my appreciation for Owlcat's interpretation of the setting, but to set the stage for my disappointment when it comes to how they handled its alignment system. In Rogue Trader, there are 3 alignments: Dogmatic, Heretic, and Iconoclast. The first is how closely you adhere to the Imperial Creed, how ruthlessly you enforce the Imperium's laws and intolerances. Heretic is obviously the opposite, how much you work to serve the Chaos Gods, seek out profane power, and work to undermine the Imperium. Iconoclast is distinct in that it's the designated good guy path, exploring how much your character values dignity, compassion, and human life. Mostly. There are some things about the setup that I like. Differentiating Servant of the Imperium from being a good person is very accurate and very necessary. Owlcat's understanding of this is one of the main reasons I appreciated their approach to 40k so much. I also like that although you can get locked into an alignment, you're still allowed to pick lower tier options from the others if you feel like they fit the situation. But that's about it. The core issue with this system is its simplicity. Rogue Trader is an uncommonly fun, rich, and thoughtful exploration of the 40k setting, but you only have 3 options for navigating it, and they're the broadest, most simplistic expressions of these ideologies. They're caricatures. It's like being presented with a dog, and your options are to shoot it, skin it alive, and wear its intestines like a necktie, or give it a pat on the head. To put it in more accessible D&D terms, it's like the only role-playing options are the most stereotypical and straightforward versions of chaotic evil, lawful evil, and chaotic good. Besides just being a reduction in options from the Pathfinder games, Dogmatic, Heretic, and Iconoclast don't present the same level of believability and nuance that exists for your companions or the narrative as a whole. They're appropriately extreme for 40k at its biggest and dumbest, but that doesn't cohere with the rest of the game. Similarly, these are also dogmatic within themselves. There's no Heretic Rogue Trader that isn't a slavering, bloodthirsty psychopath. There's no Iconoclast Rogue Trader that isn't a Boy Scout, and there isn't a Dogmatic Rogue Trader that can follow the spirit of the law instead of the letter. These render every possible player character arc into a flat and boring line. And look, I wasn't expecting Rogue Trader to have the same rich and thoughtful exploration of evil like Tyranny had. That would have been incredible, of course, but that is a markedly high bar to clear. Instead, these 3 alignment options, lacking any nuance or alternate interpretation, stunts the player's ability to meet Rogue Trader on its own level. You're being asked to play Kingdom Death Monster with tiddlywinks. There are a handful of options earlier on where you can express your alignment in more than one way, but these are vanishingly rare, and they all but disappear past Chapter 2. Now, these options may be small and mechanically identical, but that extra bit of role-playing flavor they add to your playthrough is noticeable. That's something else that doesn't work. Your alignment is a mechanically relevant choice. Each time you pick an option, you're pushed farther into that alignment, which grants extra boons the further along you are. This is an interesting idea that makes sense on paper, providing meaningful mechanical rewards for dedicated roleplay. But in practice, this creates a number of compounding issues. Because there are mechanical rewards for engaging with alignments, these tag dialogue choices had to be paced out appropriately. The buffs they can grant are insane, so Owlcat had to spend a non-insignificant amount of time ensuring each dialogue option had the appropriate tag and awarded the appropriate amount of alignment points. This results in many dialogue options not getting tags, because that would throw the balance out of whack, or correctly tag choices that heavily align with dogmatic, heretic, or iconoclast philosophies only awarding you a pittance of alignment points for the same reason. The larger, more critical problem is that if you have a role you want to play that doesn't neatly conform to the alignments presented, you're fucked out of luck. That character will always be weaker than one that just picks one and commits. This not only limits your options, but incentivizes the player to look for the relevant dialogue tag and click it out of obligation. Now, that might fit dogmatic and heretic playthroughs, but again, that locks you into expressing the simplest version of those ideals. There's also considerable opportunity cost in constricting the player this way. Most glaringly, none of the available options are about being a classic chaotic neutral rogue trader, getting the bag, the Sigma male grind set. You can technically play a character like that, but that means picking fewer tag dialogue options, which is boring, or picking an even balance of the 3, which is erratic and non-committal. The fact that you even played this type of character isn't made explicit until the ending slides, which means that being the most rogue trader is not an active choice you make, but a passive result of being an enlightened centrist. Ugh. In the moment-to-moment gameplay, this feels even worse. You can go from freeing enslaved mutants at great personal cost to racing to meet your planet-burning quota within the same 20 minutes. That's not role-playing, that's just psychopathy. And again, that's if you dedicate yourself to radical centrism, which is an option the game neither clarifies nor incentivizes. However, dedication to the alignments have their own separate issues that also make them unsatisfying. Starting off with dogmatic, this alignment, while consistently cruel and callous as befitting a devotee of the Imperial cult, is also the most rote interpretation of what that means. If your only interaction with 40k is annoying nerds shouting heresy at literally everything that moves, a meme that was old in 2008, never mind now, the dogmatic alignment is the ultimate expression of that meme. That has its own appeal, but it gets old quickly, and this is a massive game. What's especially puzzling is that there are characters that have the same alignment, yet have far more nuanced and interesting ways of expressing that extreme faith. Sister Argenta, a woman defined by her piety and zealotry, also cares deeply about the Imperium's impoverished and disenfranchised. Heinrichs is often willing to compromise on his dogmatism. Although loyal to his Inquisitor and the Imperium, he frequently engages in dangerous and heretical acts in order to achieve his goals. There is no ability to make such compromises with the player character. Instead, your dogmatic options usually boil down to how many orphans you can kill because they breathed on the same planet a heretic visited once. The exceptions are few and far between. My favorite was when your rival Incendia goes completely off the deep end and turns Footfall into her own personal Kamara. There's a dogmatic option that chastises her not for killing huge squads of innocent people, but for assuming too much authority in doing so. There's also a couple good moments where other dogmatic characters are taken aback by your cruel and slavish devotion to the creed, but that's all they are. Moments. Your character can't spiral into increasing hatred and zealotry as the game progresses, nor are they allowed to color their faith with hard-nosed pragmatism or dark sanguinity. Their faith never waxes or wanes or has any dimensions beyond to kill everything right now. It's on brand for some of the sillier interpretations of the Imperium, but again, not Rogue Trader as a whole. Heretic options are just as flat. They're simply a different flavor of silly. Within the immense scope of 40k fiction, the best, most compelling Chaos-aligned characters are so compelling because of their subtlety, or because they began their descent with noble intentions. Rogue Trader itself has such characters, but the player character is bereft of any such arc. There's no descent, there's no gradual corruption, you dive headfirst into the organ baths and you don't surface for the rest of the game. Joining Chaos out of what appears like pure sadism undermines the narrative's otherwise excellent portrayal of the Imperium as a soul-crushing monstrosity that drives people to Chaos with its wanton cruelty. However, there's no meaning or method behind the player character's madness, which is what the end of a Chaos corruption arc looks like, not the start. There was another missed opportunity here, the ability to craft a worthier, more complex, and sinister villain protagonist. Besides just being a more engaging arc to pursue throughout the game, there's also a ton of diabolic shenanigans Rogue Trader leaves behind by being so open with its heretic path. Ideally, the central conceit of a heretic playthrough would be hiding your Chaos power level until the right moment. You're in an extremely public position and surrounded by powerful Imperial loyalists, so carefully seeding corruption throughout the expanse until the perfect moment should become the overall direction of the campaign. There is evidence that the ability to corrupt some of your companions was cut during the development process, and I hope it makes its way back into the game eventually. Without such an option, the ability to be a heretic is weightless. Instead, your companions make a concerned remark when you do something obviously evil completely out in the open, but don't react beyond that. Not until Chapter 4 when the Inquisitor takes the dogmatic characters away, which is less laying the cards on the table and more being put in timeout. None of your companions make an attempt on your life beforehand, nor do they try to dissuade you from your path. They don't even just dip. For what has the potential to be the most off-the-wall and divergent playthrough, it is shockingly inert. Restoring the ability to corrupt your companions in Rogue Trader and betray the incorruptible would add some much-needed reactivity to a heretic playthrough, all while making your Rogue Trader feel more like the herald of evil that they are. Going back to more subtle versions of the heretic path, there's also a lot missed in how blatant the villainy is. It's Saturday morning cartoon grindhouse, which has its appeals of course, but misses opportunities to push the boundaries even further. I'm reminded of the differences between the Knights of the Old Republic games and their portrayals of the dark side. In the first one, a Sith playthrough isn't much more than being a greedy bully. In the second, you can convince a healthy person that they have the plague and should kill themselves to avoid spreading it further. That's the sort of villainy that Rogue Trader lacks. You can feed your Eldar companions souls to Slaanesh, which is cool, but these sinister long-con options are few and far between. Like, take Argenta's quest, the one that culminates in her entering that ship. Imagine if you were allowed to fire her up about her faith for the entire game, getting her psyched as hell to find that relic. And then you just leave her on Salus Prime to die a long, slow, cold death in the bowels of her hope. That's the best sort of heretic stuff in the 40k lore, and Rogue Trader doesn't have much of it. It's a shame, because while it nails the presentation of chaos at its extremes, it doesn't do a great job of making it compelling. It's stuck in this awkward area where the heretic options are too dumb and overtly evil to feel like a real arc. It doesn't convey the rest of the game's biting criticism of the Imperium, and it doesn't indulge in the magnificent bastard heights of chaos villainy. What's left is something that feels like it was included out of obligation, an out-and-out evil path that was included for variety's sake. And that's where we come to Iconoclast, the most difficult alignment to talk about. While the other two are simpler and more direct, they're at least consistent. Iconoclast, however, feels like it underwent numerous iterations during development. The original name for this alignment was Benevolentia, which is fitting considering how much the theme of benevolence dominates Iconoclasm. The mechanical buffs are centered around teamwork and capable leadership, while 90% of the Iconoclast dialogue options and story choices revolve around displaying compassion and mercy. It's that last 10% that causes problems. While I absolutely prefer an alignment to contain the spectrum of behavior and beliefs within a broader theme, the issue is that every other ideology or dedication that doesn't fit dogmatic or heretic was incorporated into Iconoclasm instead, likely driving the name change. It would be more accurate to say that the alignment represents subverting Imperial doctrine for non-chaos related reasons, which is such a broad definition that Iconoclast choices can and will fly in the face of all that heroism that Iconoclasm is almost always about. It's not making choices within a broader theme, it's being an unambiguous hero, plus a bunch of other random shit that got stapled on. For instance, how does being a good person give you the ability to unravel an insane alien clown prophecy? In a similar vein, a dedicated Iconoclast playthrough can reward you with Incendia Corda as a secret companion for the last couple hours of the game. You know, this lady. The woman who was eating people's brains with a caviar spoon. This is the Iconoclast companion? She can also be the secret dogmatic companion, for obvious reasons, but why Iconoclast? It's very Iconoclast of the player character to give her a shot at redemption, but that grace doesn't transfer onto Incendia herself, especially not when we're shown her cruelty towards Footfall in such graphic detail. Caligos might have been a better choice because it's at least hinted that, like his tabletop incarnation, he was once a more kind and benevolent figure to the lower classes. Instead, he can only be redeemed by an Iconoclast rogue trader, not recruited. This makes me think, why wasn't the Harlequin the secret companion? Being willing to work with Xenos and treating them well is a central facet of an Iconoclast playthrough. Dialogue with him is tied to iconoclasm, and the character himself has very good reasons to help the rogue trader stop Calcazar. He even shows up in the same scene where you can recruit the other two. Instead, he just gives you a shitty amulet that at this point in the power scale barely rates as vendor trash. It's not like adding a solitaire to the party would throw off the balance either. Again, Abelard has already proven himself on par with Primarchs. Speaking of which, your two Iconoclast companions, Abelard and Jai, are perfect examples of how this alignment lacks cohesion. Abelard is always fun to have around, don't get me wrong, but the one thing that distinguishes him as Iconoclast is that he's slightly more of a normal person by 40k standards. He is still rigidly contemptuous of the pores, far more so than the dogmatic Argenta. He's also one of the companions that will stick with you during a heretic playthrough, which, of course, is incompatible with being a good person. Jai is labeled Iconoclast for the same reason. She's one of the more normal companions. This makes sense for her character, but she isn't as kind or heroic as her alignment would otherwise indicate. She's more of a scoundrel archetype, her defining character traits being her avarice and ambition. Maybe that's why they both only have 2 ticks? I mean, hell, if we go by that defying Imperial dogma for non-chaos reasons definition, Calcazar is an Iconoclast as well. That certainly doesn't feel right. Regardless, even if you ignore the edge cases where being Iconoclast isn't about compassion and instead accept it as a purely heroic path, it fails there too, but for more complicated reasons. Now, even being allowed to play a hero in a 40k game is an interesting and engaging choice. After all, I'm one of those nerds who uses the no-judgment, consequence-free environment provided by video game power fantasies to help the characters within them. I also understand and appreciate why it exists within Rogue Trader. The issue is that being a heroic figure in 40k should be a harrowing and punishing prospect. Those aforementioned beloved characters are only so popular and enduring because they suffer tremendously to maintain their ideals and humanity. But in Rogue Trader, you are showered with boons, buffs, and great loot just for being a swell guy. Personally, I feel like an Iconoclast playthrough should be the equivalent to increasing the difficulty by a step. Skirting around the conversation about locking heroic options behind mechanical skill, making the heroic path so easy feels uniquely unsuited to this game and this universe. Being a good person in 40k means pissing off everyone, especially the Imperium. Showing kindness and tolerance in the face of that overwhelming hatred should be incredibly challenging. It isn't, so the weight and appeal of performing heroic actions in the face of such adversity are absent. We'll talk more about this in a second, but it needs to be noted how little the game changes for what is arguably the rarest conviction found in 40k. Being dogmatic should be easier because everything in the Imperium is built to reward and promote that behavior. Being a heretic should be easier because Chaos is always willing to shower powerful traders with boons and dark blessings to advance their interests. In 40k, being a good person typically means you end up dead. But in Rogue Trader, your punishments feel like Owlcat is pulling their punches. If you're punished with a mechanical malice, it's a slap on the wrist. Narrative dedication to iconoclasm is no different. You can take dozens of kind and benevolent actions within Rogue Trader, and besides everyone looking at you like you're a crazy person, you face no real consequences. At my most generous, I could say that the iconoclast options being so readily available and beneficial is part of the satire. Rogue Trader is showing how the Imperium's cruelty is completely unnecessary and actively dangerous, that it only takes one kind person in a position of tremendous power to make life safer for the average Imperial citizen. But I find this interpretation specious for several reasons. First and foremost, the benevolent tyrant is a theoretical concept that can only exist in a vacuum. Many of 40k's central suppositions do not support the existence of such a character, and Rogue Trader's endless mockery of imperial authoritarianism means portraying it as a force for positive pro-social change in this specific instance does not cohere with the rest of the game. More subjectively, the game providing so little resistance to an iconoclast PC feels more like a concession to traditional heroism found in more conventional RPG settings than anything else. The very last iconoclast choice, killing Calcazar to avenge the billions he murdered in his hubris,
Okay, let's kill him. Let's kill this guy. Let's beat him to death with hammers.
is the only choice that has a consequence, in the ending slides. This is a little lame and perfunctory, but at least it's something. If you kill Calcazar, the Imperium sends a fleet to execute you and dismantle your trade empire. Now this works as part of 40k satire. It illustrates that any effort to better the Imperium is doomed because absolute power wielded responsibly will always be subsumed by the larger immutable systems that granted that power in the first place. No matter how reasonably you ruled, no matter how much that dickhead Inquisitor deserved it, you crossed the single no-no line, and now you're donezo. That's classic 40k. But you're never going to see this ending slide because this singular consequence could be completely circumvented if you did the Nomos side quest, which is clearly signposted and takes, in total, all of 30 minutes to complete. Furthermore, you can be the nicest dude ever, subverting Imperial authority at your leisure for the entire game, and then spare Calcazar and get off scot-free. This is telling the player that there's a right way to do the Imperium, which, again, is not supported by anything else in the game. This isn't just subpar 40k, it's poor storytelling. Having evil options in interactive fiction exists to give the good ones more weight. If you're forced to do good and be good, then there's no meaning behind it. When it comes to Rogue Trader, heroic choices are not only the most morally obvious options available, they are also the most mechanically and narratively optimal, which damns the dogmatic and heretical convictions to dedicated role-playing runs at best, and raw contrarianism at the worst. That doesn't mean they're not fun sometimes, or that the game would be better off without them, just that the premise of the conviction system was flawed from the start. The end result of having dogmatic, heretic, and iconoclast are two shallow yet consistent ideologies, and one that is more varied at the cost of being simultaneously too compelling and thematically muddled. Somehow. But beyond any broader issues with coherency or nerdy 40k specific nitpicks, this conviction system doesn't add enough to the game as a whole. These three alignments are a long step backwards from the Wrath of the Righteous, which could feel very different depending on your mythic path. The entire tone of the campaign would change. You'd think that a reduction in raw options would mean that the three choices would be more in-depth, have more reactive plotting, or lead to wildly divergent main quests, but this isn't the case. Your conviction mostly affects the ending slides, which, while numerous and varied, feel like a last-minute addition to reward alignment dedication. It's nice to get some reactivity, but aside from some colony project and a paint job for your bridge, the meaningful changes made within the campaign due to your choices are decidedly slim. They don't change it outside of flavor. And hey, like I said, flavor is important. However, within the broader CRPG genre, within Owlcat's established pattern of excellence, within all of the expectations set by the narrative as a whole, I can't help but find this disappointing. And that's the sum of my complaints with Rogue Trader. Mild disappointment. Missed potential. Now, despite dropping all that criticism at your feet like a cat with a dead bird, I want to reiterate once again that its flaws were not enough to stop me from loving this game. They only became evident after I sat down and thought about it for a while. They only exist at all because of Owlcat's tremendous ambition, but these issues are still present. I feel like everything it was going for, everything it nailed, was undercut at the finish line. With a little more time and resources to round out the final third, with some more thought and nuance put into its alignment system, Rogue Trader could have been the very best 40k on offer. Anywhere. That it's so tantalizingly close to realizing that is why I had to talk about it. For me, someone who has clearly invested more time and energy into 40k than your average person, I got so much out of Rogue Trader, but I was also much more willing to meet it halfway when I shouldn't have needed to. If there's any consolation, I can pretty confidently say that my criticisms of Rogue Trader were likely the result of time and budgetary constraints, not anything foundational. Owlcat's love for 40k shines through in every facet, even when it stumbles. And that mattered for me, more than I thought it would. The reason being that my 40k is oppositional to the current direction of the overall franchise, which is currently suffering a crippling identity crisis. Although Owlcat made Rogue Trader in close partnership with Games Workshop, and there were a number of times I could feel their red pen dragging across the script, it feels so much more like the 40k of yesteryear. A more nuanced, interesting, and intentional setting with a strong voice. With 40k becoming a multimedia juggernaut, there has also come a noticeable direction to simplify and sanitize sanitize the setting into something more palatable. And no, before you lump me in with the cretinous basement dwellers whining about female custodies and space marines, that's not what I'm getting at. Those maladjusted losers leaving the hobby is the only unilateral positive to come from the franchise's newer direction. The actual problem is that Games Workshop is less and less willing to portray the Imperium as a villainous entity. Errant ass-covering lines here and there do not count as meaningful critique. Their heart just ain't in it. This goes from bringing back unequivocally good and just Imperial authority figures like Guillaume to making a new breed of Space Marines that are biggerer and betterer in every way. The Primaris Marines. Their gene seed is perfected. They're even depicted more clearly, more elegantly. All of this is sending extremely mixed signals about the overall direction and intentionality of the setting. By ennobling the Imperium, even by degrees, everything that makes it compelling, enjoyable satire is lost. Moreover, doing so is much worse than just making blander art. It's embracing what the Imperium of mankind says about itself, its own propaganda. It becomes a depiction that is no longer critical of fascism, but blithely tolerant of it. There's a thought-provoking article by Tim Colwell that examines this phenomenon. Satire without purpose will wander in dark places. It is very, very critical of 40K, and rightly so. I don't agree with everything he says, but it is damn near required reading for understanding what the franchise has become over the years. Out of everything Mr. Colwell says, it's this that I think is the most relevant. Genuinely satirical or thought-provoking ideology, which cannot be readily incorporated into the established system, is either watered down to the point of meaninglessness or rejected outright. Readers of Warhammer 40K's lore are allowed to learn that war is bad, as long as they also learn that it is necessary, that the Imperium is deeply corrupt and evil, but that there is simply no better or more viable alternative. Decades of identity erosion summed up in one paragraph. Like when Bethesda turned the Brotherhood of Steel into Knights in Shining Armor to increase Fallout's marketability, so too the Space Marines have been sanded down to flavorless big dudes in power armor for the sake of branding. Games Workshop are lost in the sauce being, of course, record-high revenue streams. It was inevitable that we'd end up here. At the very least, GW is better about sharing their profits than Bethesda. However, we're months, weeks away from seeing an Ultramarine on a bag of Doritos, and once that happens, I think my brain will be broken forever. So, despite my criticisms of Rogue Trader, I still felt it was important, as a work of interactive art, to discuss. It's good enough to warrant that kind of close critique. When the stewards of a setting I love a lot have abandoned everything about it that made it compelling, it's works like Rogue Trader that I turn to instead. If there's anything Mr. Colwell missed in his assessment of 40K, it's how much better everyone who isn't Games Workshop understands the assignment, and how awesome it is when they're allowed to run rampant.
Space Marines!
People often say that they prefer Warhammer Fantasy because of the more comprehensible scale and more consequential stories that can take place within it. I understand that. But I hold the opposite opinion. I prefer 40K because it's a universe that supports more compartmentalized narratives, more space for your dudes, your 40K. It's a unique and compelling playground for talented people to tell their own stories. Which is why I enjoyed Rogue Trader so much. Although it wavers in its ability to execute its ideas, it understands the appeal of 40K, as well as the underlying satire. It understands and enjoys the absurdities that come along with the biting criticisms and heavy metal science fantasy action in the same ways that I do. My 40K isn't the only way to enjoy the setting, of course, and again, hardly unique to myself, but it feels like it's becoming less and less common, more and more obscure, something to be found in the margins of the text instead of the prose, the licensed stuff. There are plenty of other awesome 40K games, but they're awesome in different ways. What made Rogue Trader stand out to me is that it used its wordier, more complex genre responsibly. It didn't condescend to me, it respected my time, and it used the CRPG format to explore the 40K universe with affection and enthusiasm. That kind of energy is infectious. I have no idea what Owlcat's budget, scope, or future plans are for this game outside its first few DLCs. But whatever they have planned, I doubt they have the ability to fully address my criticisms, and that's okay. This video is releasing about a month before Rogue Trader's first big DLC drop, and I'll be there day one. I'm even more excited to see where this game ends up in a couple years. Owlcat have proven themselves to be dedicated, capable caretakers of their games. Say what you will about the bugs, but at least they get patches, support, and content even years down the line. If you're into 40K, you owe it to yourself to check it out, especially if anything I said about how I enjoy the setting or its current state resonated. If all of that was just deranged rambling to you, I'd still recommend it once its technical state is sorted out, simply due to its strength as a CRPG. Who knows, Rogue Trader might turn you into one of us. It certainly stands as an example that no matter the franchise's broader direction, we'll still be getting good stuff for a while. It may not be perfect, but nothing ever is. Thanks for watching.